Been much debate around the relative inaffordability of residential property in and around Cape Town, City Bowl and Atlantic Seaboard. There's been mounting anger amongst residents. Some believe that they're being shut out of that market. They just can't afford to live there anymore or rent there. And of course, it's a place of work for many, so that does provide challenges. The blame sometimes laid at the foot of digital nomads, other times at the availability of short-term rentals, really quite high in that market, and that crowds out the availability of longer-term rentals. Short-term rentals more for tourists and business travelers, for instance, crowding out residents' need for longer-term rental residential properties. It would seem, if one looks at the rental values in those areas or the residential property values, that yes, by South African standards, they are quite exorbitant. There's a broader affordability debate mounting too, if one looks at the Western Cape province as a whole. And that's where I want to take this discussion now, because if one looks at Stats SA data, the most recent being April, average house price growth for the Western Cape province as a whole is 9.3% year on year. That's significantly above the 5.9% national average, and even more significantly above Gauteng, the other major property regions, 3.0%, or KZN, the third major property region, 2.5%. So the Western Cape's affordability relative to the rest does seem to be deteriorating at a faster rate. You look at it at house price growth since 2010, cumulatively, according to Stats SA data, Western Cape 164.5%, Gauteng a far lesser 75.2%, KZN 73.8%. Now, so simplistically, affordability seems to be deteriorating at a faster rate in the Western Cape province. It's not quite that simple. Affordability is price growth relative to purchasing power growth in a region. And the Western Cape might have superior purchasing power growth, because if one looks at GDP data by S&P Global going back to the year 2000, I've indexed it with GDP in 2000 as 100 for each region, and we've seen that the index for the Western Cape shows the fastest growth, slightly ahead of Gauteng, and the two of them more significantly ahead of the rest. So purchasing power growth in the Western Cape and Gauteng has probably grown noticeably faster over the years than others, and I suspect at the moment the Western Cape economic outperformance continues, and that may mean that its purchasing power growth also outperforms. Nevertheless, I would doubt that at the moment average income growth is growing as fast as house price growth in the Western Cape. So there could well be some ongoing affordability deterioration. But it goes further than that. You can't just take the affordability deterioration and say, well, that means a greater housing shortage because less and less people are going to be able to afford it in future. You need to look at new housing delivery that's coming and it's in the pipeline too. Will the Western Cape alleviate its affordability challenge by superior delivery of housing? Now, superior rental growth, superior which we've been seeing in TPN's data, and superior residential property growth, which we've been seeing in other data, means superior returns, probably in many instances relative to the rest of the country for the property investor. And that normally spurs greater investment in residential property. Is that the case? Well, let's look at new building plans passed, new residential building plans passed by province. And yes, it would seem that the Western Cape is increasingly outperforming, to the extent that in recent years, according to Stats SA data, the new residential plans passed have actually exceeded those in the Western Cape's share of national total, have exceeded those of Gauteng. And that's actually quite amazing, because Gauteng has by far a bigger population and double the is virtually double the economic size of the Western Cape. So it may not be that the most acute housing shortages in future will be in the Western Cape province if it can keep up that superior delivery. We've got to start asking questions about Gauteng's residential building numbers. But it goes further. We need to also look at the population growth. Now, the Western Cape and Gauteng being the two economies that have grown the fastest over the years, Gauteng's being the biggest obviously, mean that these have been the places of relative great economic opportunity relative to the rest, and so have had stronger net inward migrations of people looking for economic opportunity. They are magnets somewhat, economic magnets. And that, along with their respective fertility rates, has meant that these two provinces have been the ones with the fastest population growth, which obviously poses a housing challenge. But the fastest population growth is not the Western Cape. It's actually Gauteng, which has grown, according to S&P global estimates at any rate, by 97.5%. So its population has almost doubled from 1996 to 2024. The Western Cape not far behind with 84.7%. Take KZN, the other major economic region, that only has 39.1%. So the population growth pressures are acute on the Western Cape and Gauteng, but not seemingly most acute on the Western Cape, actually on Gauteng. So where would I ask the most questions in terms of future housing shortages? Well, I think both of these two major economic provinces have challenges because of their rapid population growth rates. I don't think they have major challenges, and urban planning and new residential development is a massive issue. But taking everything into account, the apparent pace of housing delivery, the population growth rates, Gauteng, the fastest estimated population growth rate, not so impressive relative to its size on new housing delivery at the moment, new home building at the moment. Perhaps future shortages, when thinking about that, bigger questions should be asked around Gauteng province, the biggest province population-wise and economic growth-wise in the country, and perhaps to a lesser degree ask questions about the Western Cape, whose delivery looks to be more significant at the moment. But nevertheless, as I've said, most have got challenges. It's just that it's not that simple. This is the point I'm trying to make. Just because you, for a while, have had outperforming house price growth in the Western Cape, and rental growth for that matter, it doesn't necessarily just imply that that's the province that's going to run into the bigger housing shortages in future. Time will tell.